Hello, and welcome to the Block Explorer. I'm Colin Brightfield.
Hey folks, I'm Cash Upton.
The Block Explorer is here to educate and inspire you about the world of crypto and NFTs.
We'll do deep dives into critical concepts for understanding what's happening and discuss the current events shaping the space.
We're making this podcast for the curious, the free thinkers, and the change makers that propel us forward.
As we embark on our adventures, remember that none of this is financial advice and crypto can be risky.
In this episode, we give you a breakdown of some basic blockchain terminology and design so you can get a better understanding of where the crypto industry is moving and how this will shake out in the future by exploring what layer 1 versus layer 2 blockchains are and what this whole kind of conversation ultimately means. So you might have heard layer 1, layer 2 kicked around before, and you might not really know exactly what the conversation's about. And so this episode is really here to give you some clarity around that, so you walk away with some really bird's eye view understanding of blockchain design. So we're not going to get too much in the weeds, but we are going to get a little technical here, but hang with us. We're going to do a great job explaining what you need to know.
But before we get started, a quick word from one of our sponsors.
Today's episode is sponsored by Zen Drifter. Zen Drifter is a collection focused on wellness and entrepreneurship. You're invited to join me, Colin Brightfield, on the Zen Drifter Yoga, Surf, and Crypto Retreat in Nosara, Costa Rica next spring from March 26th to April 2nd, 2022. We're going to going on an adventure to pristine Jungle Beach with warm surf for all levels, lots of great yoga to unwind, and we're going to have opportunities and workshops to learn about NFTs, the blockchain revolution, and lots of things that people are doing with climate change and crypto and where they overlap. So you can get all the info and details on the website at zendrifter.com. We hope to see you there.
I'll definitely be there. I'm excited.
I think I'll definitely be there too, Cash. I don't know. I think someone said I am supposed to be there.
You and the yoga, my friend, and the crypto for all. Awesome. All right. So, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation today. Layer 1s versus layer 2s, right? If you listen to Bankless often, you hear that they are packing their bags and heading to layer 2. So, what does that mean? Why are we even here? And, at the end of the day, it's functionality, it's price. We've all seen gas on Ethereum be incredibly high compared to other blockchains. And it's like, and why is that? Right? Like, and so we're going to dive in today of what does it mean to, have a more expensive gas fee, and then how do we get around that? And what are the things that are being done right now to kind of solve some of these questions?
Fantastic intro, Cash. Yeah. And I think this is such an apropos conversation because gas fees have been sustainably much higher than usual. And it just seems that, demand for block space on Ethereum is just going up. And that's what if people don't know, gas fees are the transaction fees that you pay to get your transactions through the blockchain. And so, ultimately though, like this whole conversation hinges on the fact that in crypto, we have digital property rights. So that means you get to keep your own stuff. So if you want to, you actually have the option to take your stuff and move from one network, one blockchain to another blockchain, and nobody can stop you. Right. And this empowers users because now users own their own data, which is essentially their tokens in your crypto wallet, your assets. And this makes, the networks and all the apps act in a much more kind and user-friendly way because they can't just abuse you because they don't have a monopoly over you, unlike most of the Web 2 companies. Right. So like if you leave Twitter, you can't take your followers with you. And if you build up a huge YouTube channel and YouTube just changes how much money they take from you, you really have no choice. They're just taking whatever they want to take. Right. They can change the rules of the game anytime you want because you're playing on their playing field. They own the network. And if you leave, you just leave. Right. You don't get anything out of if you leave. Where this is massive unlock now, right, with crypto, because it's given us digital property rights. And this is a feature of crypto, right? It's not a detriment that you can actually take your stuff and move. This is massive. And this is what's kind of fueling this whole revolution that we're seeing with NFTs. And it's just the beginning, and it's allowing for new markets to exist. And then on top of those markets, we have ecosystems of all these new fascinating DAOs and apps and artists that are springing up within these markets and thriving.
I love it. And let's take one step back, because I'd like you to clarify a little bit too. When we say digital property rights, we're owning a block, or you're owning a part of the Ethereum blockchain. What does that really mean at the end of the day? At the end of the day, it's the settlement of a transaction, and you're buying space on that ledger. You're paying to be put onto that block of history, as this was what happened on the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah. So blockchains sell block space, and when you are trying to get a transaction through, you're trying to buy space inside a block that's on a blockchain ledger. And so you have to essentially bid on it depending on what the volume of the blockchain is at a certain time, right? And so like depending on how busy, how many people are running through their transactions at any given time, it can change the network, right? Like, so if there's an NFT drop that's really popular, like we saw with, all the time this past summer, like when certain NFT drops were happening, like gas was just insane, because a lot of people want to use the network. And this is where we kind of run into some of these limitations with blockchain design. And we're going to explore that a little bit here in this episode, and explore, why there's certain trade-offs in how you design a blockchain.
Yeah. And I hope that, we can have a little bit better answer, and our listeners can have a little bit more understanding on, why maybe we're a little more bullish on Ethereum compared to Solana when it comes to finance, when, Solana is super cheap gas and a lot of throughput, but is it sacrificing something? Right. And so I think we're going to go into that a little bit more later on, but it's something for our listeners to kind of keep in the back of their mind of, okay, what's holding things back here? And then what are the solutions that are trying to fix this?
Yeah, and blockchain design matters, and architecture matters, because how you design this system determines the properties ultimately of the blockchain will have, and then which is going to in turn instantiate and encourage and incentivize a certain set of behaviors that from users that use that network or use that blockchain. And then that also kind of leads to a culture and like a kind of values of a community around that blockchain. And so it's actually really interesting, because if you do look around, and people that might not be like that in depth with the crypto community, but if you spend, at least a little bit of time in the crypto world, you see that there is a lot of like this tribalism that goes on, or people are very, much evangelical about certain kinds of blockchains and certain networks, and how they kind of parse out the answers to some of the questions we're going to bring up today. Kind of like really sets the culture of a community that uses that chain. And maybe it's still new, and it's but these narratives are really powerful, and people latch onto them.
Yeah, and blockchain design. Bitcoin was, for the most part, made to be cash paid from one person to another. Whereas what we're
super secure,
and
right?
super secure,
and completely kind of a closed system, right? So you can't build anything on top of the Bitcoin network, or there people are trying to develop some things now, but it's not really meant, right? It's not meant to,
right? It wasn't designed
where
for that.
Ethereum was designed to have all these layers, and that was baked into when they were building Ethereum. They put all these hooks on it on the outer layer and said, okay, yeah, like we're essentially building a whole kind of ecosystem here, and we're going to be the base layer. And so when you look at the way that this blockchain stack kind of lays out, we have the settlement layer at the bottom. And if you can kind of look at like this as like, you're building a house, right? And so you have to have a strong foundation. If you're building like a skyscraper, right? Let's like you need to have the foundation is really important, right? And so you have to have good bedrock to build on, right? If you're going to build a skyscraper in Manhattan, right? One of the things is like they check they check the rock that's there, and they're like, okay, well, depending on like how the quality of the foundation is how high you can go, right? So I think this is like a kind of great analogy for this stack of technology. So we have sediment layer at the base. So we have different layers that we're going to go through. Then we have the asset layer. So the sediment layer is Ethereum. That's the blockchain itself.
And is that where we would say the ledger is, where the history
that's the
of
actual
all transactions?
That's if you went on to Etherscan and you just read each block and it says this wallet did this transaction, this wallet did this transaction, etc. You could just read the state of the blockchain. adding different things to this ledger. And so then right on top of that, the Ethereum blockchain is we have the asset layer. And that's where we have Ethereum, the asset, the native protocol asset sits. And then we have ERC20 fungible tokens, which are like pretty much any of the tokens that you trade, like Uniswap, SushiSwap, Aave, et cetera, any of these DeFi tokens that you could trade. And then we have NFTs, ERC 721 tokens. So we have settlement layer at the bottom. That's the foundation. And then right on top of that, the first floor, right, where people come in and can start doing things, is we have the asset layer where you have things can sit. And then on top of that, we have the protocol layer. And the protocol layer is where you now have these essentially computer programs, or what we call smart contracts in crypto. And these are essentially DeFi robots or scripts that can essentially run functions, right? So they can take the assets and they can manipulate them in some way. So you have like all the verbs for banking, right? Exchange, lending, derivatives, asset management, anything that like an investment bank could do, we can do on the protocol layer. And this is essentially where we have decentralized finance kind of sits at this layer. But then the way that most people interact with it, right, is going to be at the application layer. And that's where we have decentralized apps. So that's where you have your Aaves, your Compounds, your Matchas, your Uniswaps, right? You're interacting, like the protocol layer is kind of running in the back end, right? But then when you're using it, you're using a Web3 usually interface, which is like a website essentially, or an app on your smartphone, right? And then we have the aggregation layer, which is another layer that could sit on top of that. And that's what we kind of could even call like some of these wallets now that are integrating DeFi in the back end, like the Dharma wallet. So it's almost like a DeFi mullet, or like where these new fintech kind of hybrid companies might pop up where they might just give you some kind of higher yield and then they're doing DeFi on the back end, but it just is like kind of just looks like normal bank experience on the front end.
And they're doing some more of those protocols on the back end without you as the end user really having to deposit, put it in a lending pool and do all this stuff. They're doing it on the back end a lot of the time.
Yeah. So they're doing all this yield farming and all these DeFi things at the protocol layer for you. And they're probably taking a small cut of that, right, for that service, but then they're making it super easy for the end user just to like pop on their phone and just be like, I want to get 10% yield on my ETH and I don't want to think about anything else. And I just want to click this button. So yeah, we have all these layers, right? And so eventually we know you might be using Ethereum, but you might not even know it, right? Because it's the base layer, right? And this is what's really important to understand, is that like where you build the foundation, right, is going to kind of dictate how everything else gets built out on top of it.
Yeah, that's one of the jokes in the industry is people come in and they say, where's the DeFi token? Like it's just one token, when really it's made up of all these different asset tokens and all of these different protocols, putting them all into, an application.
Yeah. And this is where I think a lot of people kind of just stop at the asset layer, right? They get Coinbase account or whatever exchange, and they buy some ETH, or they buy some Bitcoin, or they buy some DeFi tokens or whatever. They buy some SHIB these days, whatever. But they just buy, and then they just stop, right? They don't really go any further, right? And I mean, Coinbase is, you could even say, is like an aggregation or an application layer, but the way that people are interacting with it is just kind of at the asset layer. They're kind of skipping some of the coolest parts of crypto. And that's when you take your assets and you move them to a crypto wallet like MetaMask or whatever, and then you can bounce around to these Web3 apps, which are at the application layer, these Web3 websites, which are essentially they're apps that sit on top of these smart contracts. And then you can do all sorts of fun things. You can get loans that pay back themselves on Alchemix. You can do lending and borrowing on Aave. You can swap your tokens. You can do yield farming, and liquidity pools. You can mine tokens. So there's all sorts of fun things you can do. And I think that's kind of like where we're kind of, a lot of people get intimidated and get stuck. And I think this is what's cool about what we're talking about today, is because there's a lot of new tech now that's coming out that's going to make this easier for people and also ultimately less expensive. But before we get into that, let's talk about what people refer to as the blockchain trilemma.
Right. So there's a trade-off. And if we just use two examples that we've all been talking about, we have Solana and Ethereum, and we have one blockchain with super low gas fees and high throughput, and another one that has a slightly more expensive fee and less transactions per second. But we all know, hands down, Ethereum is more secure than Solana, right? So there's a trade-off that's made between the three major aspects of a blockchain, which is the decentralization of it, the scalability of it, and the security of it.
Yeah, so plain and simple, the blockchain trilemma, which is a concept that was presented by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, and it says it just says there's pretty much three main issues that developers encounter when they're building blockchains. And so more often than not, creators are forced to sacrifice, not necessarily sacrifice, but minimize one aspect for the sake of the other two, right? So we have decentralization, like you mentioned, which is rather than being managed by one single person or entity or company, blockchains distribute control over the network equally to all participants, right? That's one of the central tenets of a blockchain. To be decentralized, and it's owned by the users of the network. Security, the second one, right? Blockchain networks need to have great defenses that prevent any kind of hacks, malicious entities from taking over. And we have scalability, right? We want to have an enormous amount of transactions be able to be moved through the network, and users can join and have a great experience and have their transactions processed smoothly, quickly, and not have insane gas fees.
And so as we're addressing our layer 1 versus layer 2 topic today, what trilemma aspect does that solve?
So the trilemma aspect that layer 2s on Ethereum are solving is the scalability aspect, because Ethereum is a blockchain, that focused on security and decentralization. Right. And that's kind of where they kind of chose those two, because and as we see, right, the scalability as people have come on to the crypto scene, and especially, with the summer of NFTs that we've had, it's you can see that it's not that scalable on the layer 1 blockchain, right? On the layer 1, right? So remember that we're talking about on the layer 1 blockchain. When Ethereum was designed, it wasn't designed to have this kind of use with users. It was designed to be the settlement layer, and it was always part of the long-term plan to have layer 2s be deployed on Ethereum to make the throughput or the scalability to solve the scalability issue in the trilemma. But it just took way longer than people anticipated for these layer 2s to be developed and rolled out successfully. But now they're being done. Now they're being rolled out, and we're excited. We're excited to talk about it.
Yeah. And so, at the end of the day, what are they? They live on top of layer 1. I can get that, right? Layer 2 goes on top of layer 1.
Yeah. So let's start with there, right? So if you just imagine, I love mental models, and I think it's a great way to understand so many things, but especially crypto. And layer 1s and layer 2s lend themselves great to mental models. So imagine a layer 1 is like Manhattan, right? It's downtown, it's expensive, it's a lot of people want to be there, it's definitely got a lot happening, but it's expensive, and not everyone wants to pay all those fees to be in Manhattan. Well, then you can move from a layer 1, which is Manhattan, to the suburbs, right? You can move to Brooklyn, you can move, which is still, expensive, but it's not as expensive, or you can move even further away, right? You can move all the way to the suburbs, but you can still take the train, right, to layer 1 to Manhattan if you need to, right? So it's kind of just giving you more space. It gives you more options, and it gives you an options to stay connected to home base, like if you need to get there, but you don't actually have to live there and pay those expensive fees or those expensive like taxes, essentially.
Yeah. And it's all within the same, New York greater city area, just like you're all still within the Ethereum blockchain, even though you're on a different layer. And and a lot of that, for the most part, is because of how the layer 2 is programmed to have to interact in a certain way with the layer 1, right? So there's like no fudging. They can't say, oh, this was this, when actually it's not.
Yeah, because you still have the security guarantees of the layer 1. So the Ethereum is still managing all of the security and decentralization that's happening, mainly the security, and the layer 2s are managing the scalability kind of part of the trilemma, right? And then together, the layer 2s and the layer 1s are kind of together supporting the decentralization aspect, right? Because the more layer 2s you have, the more decentralized everything starts to get. And so it becomes harder and harder to corrupt.
And without that corruptibility, I mean, that's the part of the trilemma, right? Having that security.
Yeah. And Ethereum's block space is in high demand. And it's important to remember that, if you have more scalable blockchain, that means you have more block space literally for sale. So you have less gas fees because you have more supply. And so the transaction fees go down. Right. So that's like the main motivation financially is like, okay, yeah, I don't want to pay these higher fees. So I can go to a layer 2 and I can do my transactions and not pay $150 to buy an NFT. But it's remember, if you can look at a blockchain and you can kind of evaluate the blockchain based on how much in demand the blockchain, the blocks are on that blockchain. If you don't have demand for block space, then you don't really have a way to get transaction fees, essentially to make revenue, right? Blockchains are they're like mini businesses, right? And the way that they secure their block space, the way they secure the blockchain is by giving rewards to people who participate in the security of the network. And these are essentially called usually block rewards, and they're usually given to miners or validators of the blockchain in exchange for their computing power and helping secure the network. And if you don't have demand for your block space, then the blockchain doesn't generate fee revenue. And then you can't really incentivize people to properly secure the network. So the blockchain then becomes more open to attacks and malicious actors or whatever could happen.
So a higher fee or higher gas fee, let's call it, it does in turn further add to the security of blockchains because it's paying out a higher amount to people who are validating that security.
So it incentivizes good behavior on the blockchain because then you're going to get more of that piece of the pie of the block rewards that are being doled out for people that are participating in the security.
Cool. And yeah, and we'll do another.
So it's this positive. Yeah, sorry, but it's like, yeah, so it creates this positive feedback loop where as the block rewards are become more lucrative, then more people want to stake their ETH, right, or whatever, or mine the certain block rewards or validate the blocks. So then that only creates more security, and because it's more secure, more people want to use the blockchain because it's super secure and it's super reliable. And so then that makes the fees higher, and that makes more people want to secure the network, and that makes it more secure, and that makes people more want to use it. So it just goes on in this and that's kind of what happens. It's kind of happened with Ethereum. I mean, it's kind of got it has this Lindy effect of kind of being the premium blockchain right now for that, and we're going to get more into why we believe that. But I mean, there's always trade-offs, right? And we're not saying there's not this space in this ecosystem for all kinds of blockchains and all kinds of solutions, and different layer 1s and different layer 2s. And we're excited to just be a part of this whole ecosystem that's developing.
And what are we talking about when we talk about less fees? I mean, do people care about this? Is this like $80 down to 60, or is this like $80 down to a few bucks?
Yeah, so it's pretty significant when you actually go and take a look at what the fee savings are compared to layer 1 versus layer 2s. And we're going to go over just a few examples. So if you were going to transfer some ETH on Ethereum, earlier today, it would have been $22.67 to just transfer some ETH. So if you wanted to send ETH from your wallet to another person's wallet, your gas would be $22. On Optimism, it would be $5, $5.32. On Arbitrum, $4.27. On ZK Sync, 80 cents. On Loopring, 46 cents. On Polygon Hermes, 25 cents.
Wow. So yeah, that's almost like 100x less. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, and you know, and you're so there's kind of compromises I don't that you're making in different blockchains, right? Timing. But you know, Arbitrum is very well trusted. Optimism, I mean, all of these are, you know, these are all pretty new too, so that's something to keep in mind. So they're kind of all in this almost beta zone. But for another instance, right, if you wanted to transfer some tokens on Ethereum, it would be $51. On Optimism, it'd be $5.32. On Arbitrum, $4.69. And then if you wanted to swap some tokens, if you wanted to trade like Ethereum for Bitcoin or whatever, it would be $113 on Ethereum on a layer 1. On the layer 2, Arbitrum, $7.36. Optimism, $7.36. Loopring, $1.16. So yeah, we're significant savings, right? So it's like 90%. You know, you're paying like 10% on Arbitrum and Optimism, and you're paying even less than that, right, on some of these other ones. So the layer 2s are having this effect of lowering the transaction rates, the gas fees that you'll pay for the end users. This is significant. This is huge. By 90%, you know, that's a, you know, paying 113 versus paying 7. You know, which would you rather pay, cash?
Yeah, pretty easy answer. This is a bit of a loaded question. I know you can't answer definitively for every single one of those options you listed, but you know, what type of timelines are we talking about for people to wait compared to the, you know, usual, you know, pretty quick few minute transaction completion?
Yeah, on layer 2 it's about the, you know, it's pretty quick. It's faster. It could be faster than the layer 1, or it could be about the same. It really just depends on the blockchain, and like it can depend on how busy things are at that time when you send your transaction. And also, you know, it depends on how much gas, you know, because you could always, you know, spend more gas than you need to you know, to speed up your transaction. But I think what's more important to talk about, I mean, yes, it's faster, and that's the whole point, right, to scale. But I think what's more important is, you know, how are these layer 2s getting away with these less fees? Like, how do they do it, right? Okay, yeah, I can pay 90% less than Ethereum, but why? So yeah,
ZK rollups are something our listeners have probably heard about, and that's what's allowing for a lot of this scaling. And so, what exactly is that entail?
Yeah, ZK rollups are like carpooling for your transactions. So you just take a bunch of people that want to do a transaction on a layer 2, essentially all their transactions get rolled up into one transaction, and it gets hashed, right? So it makes this cryptographic hash out of all these transactions. And then it sends this one hash to the layer 1, and that layer 1 then computes that one hash, and that whole transaction then all those transactions get processed together as one. It's kind of like, you know, when you can on Uber, you can take a carpool, right, and it saves you a lot more money, right, if you're on Uber, rather than just getting like a one Uber by yourself, right, if you opt in for the carpool option. Or, you know, like, you know, when you can zip a file on your computer, and you just like hitting the zip button, and it just like zips up all your data and like squishes it down, and then it just sends that little bit of data through, but then you can unpack it. And that's essentially what these are doing. And it's really fascinating. It's really cool stuff. And we're not going to get too deep in the technical details about it, but there is something called a zero knowledge proof, which is used to present and public record the validity of a block on the Ethereum blockchain. But you don't really know the data that's in it. So it reduces the amount of data held in the transaction without any knowledge of the data needed. So it's pretty great stuff. I mean, this is bleeding edge cryptographic tech that and cryptography that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and that's because those zero knowledge proofs are operating within parameters that layer one, let's say Ethereum or any layer one, says you have to operate by this to do this roll up, and ergo you played by the rules.
Yeah, so Ethereum's kind of like the governor of, like, you know, like if you have like the mayor of New York, right? If you had like New York, right, and then you have like the layer one is Manhattan, and you have all the different boroughs, but all these boroughs, right, they're still part of New York City, right? And they still have to play by the rules of like New York City. And, you know, it might be cheaper to, you know, there's less tolls over here, but you still are in like the city ordinances of New York. So yeah, there's still it extends its so it's a way for Ethereum to extend its values and its guarantees for security, but then increase its scalability, increase the throughput, how many people can use it, and the fees can go down.
And that's really what people are shooting for, right? They want to be able to use it without breaking the bank, and have it be more accessible to more people in the world, which is, you know, why people joke that we're just moving to layer two. You know, we're not going to know in a while that we're on layer two. It's just going to be second nature. And most of what layer one will be is all these huge rolled up transactions, or maybe some whale transferring, you know, $500,000 worth of ETH.
I just see a lot of institutions using it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Ethereum is going to be like the clearinghouse, the settlement layer for all these different layer twos that sit on top, and they're all going to have these ways, and they're to hook into Ethereum in different ways and get their transactions through, but they're all going to share this kind of culture and these values of decentralization and security that Ethereum represents.
Super cool.
So let's get into go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's great because, you know, we have experimented a lot with other, you know, Solana blockchains and other ones, because it's very enticing to have such cheap fees. But again, you know, what are you sacrificing, and what are we, you know, not gonna get from one chain and the other? And if there's these solutions where you can have the whole trifecta, seems a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we're going to get deeper into these kind of philosophical questions and in one of our next episodes upcoming, where we talk about this idea of modular blockchain versus monolithic blockchain, which is a really hot topic right now in the crypto sphere, in the crypto world. And this is exactly why we wanted to do this episode for our listeners, is so they can kind of just get like we're kind of setting the stage so you can kind of really understand the next step, where we're going to lead you, and where you can kind of see where this thinking kind of essentially concludes, where there's kind of like a thesis that's been being tossed around right now. And we're excited to talk about that in our next episode. But let's talk about now just kind of, you know, we mentioned like some of the other chains. And so let's just kind of go through for our listeners, like what are some of the other chains, and you know, if I wanted to get into a layer two, how would I do that? Right. If I'm done paying these gas fees with Ethereum, like what are my options?
Yeah, and I'd like us to just answer the question too, because I'm been asking this for a while. Is like, you know, what's the difference between Polygon, which is a side chain, versus what is now being dubbed as a layer two? Because side chains, from my understanding, were really meant to like be alongside Ethereum. It's not another chain; it's the side. It's on the side. It's the, you know, it's the best friend. It's the sidekick of Ethereum is the Polygon network.
Yeah, so Polygon is a side chain because it doesn't necessarily have the same guarantees that Ethereum has. So it's not really like it's not sending its transactions through the same kind of security guarantees that Ethereum is. So it's less secure than Ethereum, but it's also way faster and way cheaper, and that's why people like it. But it does kind of sit alongside of it in that it's Ethereum virtual machine compatible, EVM compatible. You'll hear that a lot. And that just means that the way that Ethereum essentially processes data, it's compatible to do that. And that's what's most important if you want to kind of be part of the Ethereum family, you need to be EVM compatible. You need to be able to have your transactions processed by the same kind of machine, essentially.
Okay,
the same type of process.
There's the side chain that we've all known.
Yeah,
and
so
loved
Polygon's
for a while.
great if you don't want to pay a lot of fees. So you can go to Polygon. Polygon's been established. There's other layer ones that are out there, right? Solana's been getting a lot of news recently, and they're really picking up steam. And I know, and I've used Solana, and it's great to have your transactions processed super fast and essentially for free, very, very cheap. And then we also have Avalanche, which is another layer one, Polkadot. And then we have some really kind of interesting different blockchain concepts popping up too, Cash. So there's kind of like a different family of blockchains too that I want to talk about.
Yeah, these are the ones that we've been really getting excited about because they're not just financial tools, but they're tools for social and environmental justice and solving a lot of these climate change problems. So for one, we just talked about the Regen network, which is essentially locking up tons of carbon as if it was a DeFi protocol on Ethereum, but it's a whole nother chain and it's locking up tons of carbon instead of other tokens, which is really cool.
Yeah, I love the Regen network. I love what they're doing. They're going to become like the settlement layer for these initiatives that sit on the intersection of crypto and climate change. And it's fascinating to learn more about what they're doing. And if you haven't listened to our episode called Crypto for Good, which is our 2 episodes ago, episode 13, that's definitely worth giving a listen. And we talk more about the Regen network there. And then we have this other one that's really cool called Helium that we've been studying. And Cash, tell me more about what Helium does.
Yeah. So from my understanding, it is providing incentives to folks who have a radio hotspot that is broadcasting internet or data services, the ability to get onto a network for like the Internet of Things. And it's using a radio transmission. So it's a lot less expensive and less energy intensive than cell, and it can go farther. Where am I missing?
I think you nailed it. Yeah. I think it's long range radio waves. And so these waves use a heck of a lot less energy. So what their people can do is you can get these mining rigs, and they're essentially kind of creating this grassroots wireless network, right? Instead of like these big they're kind of creating a different version of these telecoms where like, right, you have to have these big companies come in, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile or whatever, and they have to set up big cell towers and data centers, and they have to build the infrastructure to have the wireless networks that we have. Right. But what if we had this other layer that was kind of grassroots where anyone can just run their own kind of from home mini cellular tower, essentially, right? But it's based off radio waves. So it can go way longer and uses less energy. And because we have so many people who are just kind of running these things, there's enough kind of like leapfrogging, bouncing from node to node to node that you can make this huge network. So it's kind of a new way of kind of imagining how to have wireless in the 21st crypto native blockchain century.
Yeah, without big cellular companies like Verizon and AT&T having control over you.
Yeah. So it's fascinating, and I think it's just, I think, these are the kind of cool new use cases that we're starting to see with blockchain that I think, it's kind of like this next wave. Like there's like these financial use cases and, NFTs with these creative and art use cases, but now kind of seeing like the Regen network, what they're up to and that whole crypto for good movement. And then what Helium's up to with this new kind of structure for, which consistently is like a huge, massive telecom company's job. It's massive to see. I mean, it's massive. It's a massive revolution in thinking to see where these blockchain technologies can really start to make change.
And disclaimer, I just bought a little Helium the other day.
I'm thinking about actually maybe getting one of the Helium mining rigs. They look kind of cool.
Yeah, I know 2 people just talked to in the last week who are getting them. So It's a pretty cool way. I mean, peer-to-peer, person-to-person internet, that's a very decentralized crypto mindset, right? To be able to provide internet without big cell towers.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. It's going to be interesting. So just a quick note on if you want to go from a layer 1 to a layer 2, how do you do that, right? You need to use a blockchain network bridge. So there's different bridges. There's the hot protocol, which has been around for a little while, that can get you through different layer 1s and layer 2s or side chains. You can go to Polygon, you can go to Ethereum, you can go to Optimism, Arbitrum. Solana, I think, is on there too. There's Allbridge, there's Wormhole, which has been around for a while, but I think they have a newer version out now that has more functionality. But essentially, there is some risk, right, when you do go through a bridge, because a lot of these bridges are still newer and they're kind of run by a multi-sig, which means there's like a set of maybe 10 or less people that if they all signed off on something, they could really like mess things up. So you do want to be, careful when you do go use these bridges. Make sure you're doing your research, and you might want to just like move like a tiny bit of your stash before you do the whole thing, right? Just to test it out. Just move like $10 or whatever. Move like a tiny little bit of your ETH before you start moving lots of stuff. Just check it out and make sure you're comfortable. But yeah, we're essentially, to conclude, layer 1 Ethereum, or layer 1s in general, sit at the bottom of this technology stack, the settlement layer, and then there's an ecosystem that can be built on top of it, and that's the unlock with this blockchain technology, right? We have the security and the consensus and the decentralization, but the unlock with Ethereum and some of these other, open blockchains where you can build on top is that it creates an ecosystem of innovation. And that's the same thing that happened with the internet. When the internet started, is that we had these settlement layers, these open protocols where everything could run through, and then people felt comfortable building on top of it because it was this open source, no one owned it, free space that everyone then could kind of go and tinker and play with and make things.
And so we could relate that to the HTTP open source, to the layer
ICP,
one of
and all these things,
to the layer 1 of Ethereum. And then the Facebooks and Googles came along and they built their protocol on top of this open source that then allows us to all very easily interact with this more deeper layer of the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And like, when you, if you were going to build something like a company, right, you want to build on a private company's space, because like they could just take it and take, the rug out from under you anytime they want, right? Like you don't want to go to Disneyland and start building your house in Disneyland, because it's Disneyland's land, right? You don't really own it, and they can just do everything they want with it. But that's like what we kind of have now, right? It's like you can go to Facebook land, or now Meta. You can go to Twitter, you can go to TikTok, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Google Land, whatever. It's like the internet's kind of like these like theme parks that are just run by like these massive tech companies, and it's gotten a lot less innovative and interesting because no one can really, it's really hard to build on, you can't really go on Google's land and build something unique, right? It's Google owns you, right? You can go build your YouTube channel up on YouTube, but then YouTube can just say, oh, we're going to take more now, right? And you don't have any say. So what crypto is doing, what Ethereum has done, is it's created a layer of neutrality, a settlement layer, just like the layer that will allow the internet to flourish. So it's built this foundational layer that's like a public good, that's like the sidewalk, that's like just a city block. And now people can come and make interesting things on it. Like I used to play SimCity back in the day, and like it was so fun because, right, you'd have to position like a park over here, and like, you wanted, the schools over here. You knew there was a right like formula to get the neighborhood to flourish, right? And so like Ethereum, like the city planner's like job is to build a a framework that allows flourishing to happen and creativity, innovation to happen organically. And that's how you create economic thriving, right?
Yeah.
You allow creativity to thrive. You allow human ingenuity to thrive. And that's what Ethereum has done. It's created this base layer and that's what all these, a lot of these blockchains have done, is they created this opportunity for an ecosystem of innovation to develop on top of it. And that's what's cool about layer 1, layer 2, and all these other apps that sit on top. And, and we're just at the beginning of this huge explosion of creativity in this space.
We able to make the internet weird again?
Have you checked your Twitter feed recently? It's like all like
so weird
animals and apes and turtles and things.
Oh, I love it. Well, I think that'll do it for our listeners this week. We're gonna, like Colin said, we're gonna do some deeper dives into modular and different layer 1 blockchains. But for today, I'm really happy with this dive into, hey, how do we still have the security of Ethereum without the high fees and being able to scale? So I'm really excited to hop onto layer 2 and to move some ETH around and pay a lot less fees.
Yeah, pay $5 instead of 50. It's that, right?
Yeah.
So Cash, what are you excited for this week?
I'm really excited for the In Real Life Happy Hour NFT show happening at the Soho Music Club in Santa Barbara on December 4th. Disclaimer, we are both investors in Reliquary DAO. It's our DAO to bring social and environmental justice to art and NFTs. And we're having an In Real Life Happy Hour art show auction on December 4th. And I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, we're going to have 3 fantastic artists there. We're going to have Chester Arnold, John Schooler, and Manuel de Cisneros. And all those artists won't be there, but their art will be featured. And Chester Arnold is actually going to be there at the event. So come by. He's fantastic, and they're all fantastic. And it's going to be a great evening of community art, NFTs. We're going to have a live DJ. It's going to be an awesome time.
Yep. And then later that night, our good friends and incredible band, the Salty Strings Band, which who doesn't like seeing a quartet of string instruments and a cello and a violin shred it. So stay for the rest of the night and dance away with us. We're really excited.
NFTs and Salty Strings in Santa Barbara, December 4th. You can RSVP at reliquarydao.com. Reliquary is spelled RELIQUARY.
And
DAO,
DAO.
We're going to wrap it here for today. Thank you for listening. And we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thanks for exploring the world of blockchain with us.
Crypto is changing the world. We're here to ensure you're ready.
Please subscribe, share this podcast with your friends and your dogs, and leave us a review.
Look forward to sharing our next episode with you.
Salud.
Cheers.